Namaste and welcome. The last class we did, the title was Awakening Consciousness in Shadowy Times. And the notion is not that these are especially shadowy, because I think all times are shadowy. But I did decide to turn this into a two-part series, just because it is a time that people are kind of noticing the shadow. And so last time we explored a little bit on how to relate to the fear and anger and deceit that feels thick right now, especially in our current times of having what my husband has called electile dysfunction. So we'll look at it, and we've been exploring a little societally, but primarily individually, when we're caught in trance and caught in reactivity, and we know that there's unconscious forces we're not really attending to. How do we pay attention to them? How do we wake up? And social scientists have said that fear is 7 times as likely as any other attitude to spread socially, and so it is internally. We have a survival negativity bias, and it's as soon as something's tripped off, it's very quick that we get looping in fear and get looping in reactivity. So in order to evolve individually and societally, to counter that negativity bias, we really need to wake up presence, wake up mindfulness, and wake up love. That's the antidote. So we'll continue the inquiry, as I mentioned, and begin. I'd like to begin by naming what I think is one of the most toxic and corrosive expressions of the shadow, which is cynicism. And I'm real aware of it. I see it in myself, I see it in many of us, that it's kind of a default place to go to when things seem horrible, that we get cynical. There was one story of a linguistics professor who was lecturing about, and he says, in English, 2 negatives can make a positive. And he says, but in some languages, for instance, Russian, 2 negatives still remain a negative. However, there's no language where 2 positives make a negative. And then a voice from the back piped up, yeah, right. And that's the vibe of it's kind of a been there, done that, jaded, yeah, right kind of thing. And deep down, cynicism is really an expression of fear. It's a mistrust in others' motives, and it's a kind of a giving up of hope. And I want to say that when we talk about shadow, and we talk about cynicism, we talk about politics right now, I'm not referring to it, the shadow belonging to any one party or any one person. Really, the shadow is an expression of unconscious fear, fear that has not been faced and felt and uncovered. It's universal. It's everywhere. It's in you and me and all of us. And the spiritual path is waking up to the shadow. It's just saying, oh, okay, it's here, let's look. So we're not controlled and identified with it. Instead, it's held in consciousness. So when there's cynicism, one of the tendencies in cynicism is, I don't want to belong to that system because I don't like it, because it's all messed up. And to me, that's again another shadow response. In a way that's if we want to wake up, we have to participate and be responsible too, which means voting. I mean, not voting is a sign of cynicism, of lack of hope. And so part of what I'd like to explore tonight is the importance of not withdrawing and reacting to the shadow with more shadow. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, how to stay engaged. We tend to either back down or just go into a thing of, oh, it all sucks. You know, it's like when there's this little cartoon of dogs in a conversation and one saying, well, I had my own blog for a while, But I decided to go back to just pointless, incessant barking. So on a personal level, we get cynical and jaded towards what drives others. We kind of see everybody as though they're all after their own good and so on. They're all going to take advantage of us. But our deepest cynicism is usually towards ourselves. And I see that a lot. People carry a kind of general cynical view towards their own motives and so on. I don't really trust myself, kind of a thing. One person in a course I was teaching asked, "Why should I forgive myself? I'll just do it over and over again." The bad behavior. Okay, that's cynicism. That's no trust in our own goodness and capacity to grow. There's an exercise I sometimes do where it's where we kind of explore the acts of kindness that we have done in our lives, and then in a group just have different people share acts of kindness. And then when we debrief on the exercise, inevitably, a good number of people say, "Well, I can tell you an act of kindness, but if you look at my motives, I was really just trying to feel good about myself, be a good person, look good to others. It's never just pure kindness." And that's part of our cynicism, that there's this sense of, I'm never really doing it right, I'm really never doing it enough. You know what I mean? We get caught in that. It's like it's one of the trance states that is the deepest for us, is sensing that we can, anywhere we look, see that we're not enough, or our motives have a mix in them that we don't really like. I love the story of these kindergartners on a bus together. I think they're being dropped off from school or whatever, and one little girl brings a driver a handful of peanuts. And he's surprised and touched and says thanks. And 10 minutes later, she's back with another handful of peanuts. And when it comes to the third time, she says, "Honey, just you and your friends, you can share and enjoy them." And her response was, "Oh no, we just like sucking the chocolate off of them." So the truth is, we do have marbled intentions. And there's no question. We have part of us that's always on this good person project. We want to look good to the world, and that's going to be part of the way we act. But there's more. And when we're cynical, or when we're looking at how we're falling short, we're forgetting the truth, the real truth of the fact that we do love, and we do want to be loved, and we do care about our world. We're forgetting that in the moments of cynicism. It's a very narrow state. So the key to shifting is to begin to pay attention and notice that trance, and also notice what we're missing. The newspapers fixate on what is going to be, titillating, scandalous, bring up all the emotions of fear. And we don't get so much the goodness. There was a story that was different a handful of weeks ago in the Washington Post, and I'll bet a number of you caught it, because it really was quite touching. And this is a story about a Georgetown business student who spent a lot of time after hours at school on a project, and he ended up befriending one of the university janitors, and who was an immigrant from Jamaica. And they got to know each other, and the janitor, instead of being in a role of janitor, became a real person, and the student, instead of being in the role of student, became a real person. And so he discovered in this guy, his creativity and his ambitions, his talents. And it awakened in him this whole process of being aware of all the invisible workers on campus that all had a story and a heart and humanity and dimensionality. And so he began doing this fundraising to be able to help those that were less advantaged than the students begin to manifest more of their creativity. It's called Unsung Heroes. And with this particular janitor, who's a real talented cook, it helped him open a catering business, which had been his dream when he left Jamaica. So they're hoping this will spread. And I share it now, again, because we're talking about how to respond to the shadow, that it's part of our evolutionary potential and direction to move from this kind of fear-based identity with my own tribe, my own group, to really sensing that others are not unreal others, real beings, subjective beings that, like us, want to wake up and have hearts and want to be free and want to be creative and connect. So we move from this separateness to this sense of belonging and collaborating and compassion. And this is the capacity of our most newly evolved part of our brain. This part of our brain, when we wake it up, is not cynical because it senses possibility. It senses where we can go. So when we talk about waking up, and if you use the brain as a model, the triune brain, and you see, got the reptilian and the limbic, and when we're caught in that, we're coming from an unconscious, fear-driven place, and we're going to look at the world like suspicious of motives, bad other, doubt, fear, violence. And when we start activating the prefrontal cortex, it's not like the fear and the aggression go away, but they don't dominate us. And instead, we begin to live from a larger sense of our connection, and we can notice the shadow, but not be driven by it. So I want to explore with you the two wings of mindfulness and compassion, and how they can shine a light on the shadow and transform our identity, and how that leaks out. And I would start by saying that if you think of it, that recognizing is one of the two wings. This capacity of our frontal cortex to notice what's going on, so that rather than being inside the fear, we're saying, oh, okay, fear's going on. And the second wing, which is allowing, actually says yes to what's here, rather than saying, oh, fear is bad, or I don't want to feel this. The yes is an acknowledgement of reality. This is what's here right now. In the moment that we resist or grasp, we're identified. In the moment that we recognize and allow, we start inhabiting a more whole and integrated space of awareness. So that's the direction. And meditation is the training of activating these two wings. So back to cynicism. Cynicism's a way of saying no. And the reason I'm spending time on it is because it's one of the most unseen ways that we narrow and basically say, oh, it's bad, or I'm bad. I want to read you from Stephen Colbert. And you laugh, and his is one of the most serious things he's ever written, but here we go. He says, cynics don't learn anything. I think he must have been commenting on his character, but anyway. He says, because cynicism is a self-imposed blindness, a rejection of the world because we are afraid it will hurt or disappoint us. Cynics always say no, but saying yes begins things. Saying yes is how things grow. Saying yes leads to knowledge. Yes is for young people, young in spirit. So for as long as you have the strength to say yes, it's a good one, right? So again, the meditation, path of meditation, and really what we're exploring together in this class and in general, is how do we evolve ourselves? So rather than being a naysayer that's really trying to control things and get away from what's unpleasant, we have this remembrance in our heart and mind that can say this too, and say yes to what's here. It deconditions cynicism. It gives you access to presence and to love and to aliveness. Okay, so we're going to look a little further. our saying no is typically unconscious. It's part of our primal conditioning. Whenever there's something unpleasant that goes on, our initial reflex, just like a few-celled creature when it's poked, well, that's our no. So when you feel unpleasantness, your body tenses against it, and your mind starts getting busy trying to work out a way to solve it. Your heart tightens up, and usually you do behaviors to get away from it. So we have a no that goes voop, just like that. The limbic operates really, really quickly. It's like way slower, this frontal cortex that goes, wait a minute, you're saying no, you're tightening up, you're blaming yourself, you're blaming another person, but you don't have to do that. That's slower. So meditation trains us to catch on more quickly to our no, all right? So it's typically our resistance to whatever's uncomfortable, not just unpleasant, but uncomfortable or unfamiliar or unpleasant. And right away there's a perception that something's wrong, and typically we're reacting to our no with another no. We end up going into fight, flight, freeze, and then we don't like ourselves for it. Tiny little example. Teacher asks her class of small pupils to tell about their acts of kindness to dumb animals. There were several heart-stirring stories. When it was Tommy's turn, he said proudly, well, I once kicked a boy for kicking a dog. And that's the example of, so we have a no, and then we do a no to the no. It's like somebody acts in a bad way, and then we hate them for it. It's a no to a no. So what turns a no into yes is mindfulness, which is intentionally recognizing what's going on. Okay, what's happening inside me? So you're actually tracking for your no's. How's my body contracting? How am I not liking what's here? It's really, really powerful, if you want to deepen mindfulness, to not only notice what's going on, let's say sadness or fear or anxiety or whatever's going on inside you, not just to notice it, but notice your attitude towards it. It's the feeling tone. It's called Vedana in Pali. If you don't just notice the fear, but notice, I don't want this fear here, disliking the fear, then you're including more in awareness. Your awareness is more awake. Okay, so the first step is recognizing what's going on, and the second step is to practice yes. And yes, saying yes it doesn't start by going, yes, I love this, I want this to be here, I'm going to embrace and cozy up to my fear. It doesn't start like that. When we're feeling fear, the typical thing is there's some of us going no. So the beginning is saying yes to our no. Okay? Well, you're basically allowing, okay, the fear's here, and then not liking the fear's here. You're just recognizing it and making room for that. So there's just the slightest bit of a little more space, agreeing to offer space and not do anything. That's the beginning of saying yes. Because otherwise you'd be making a leap you can't make. You can't go from no to yes artificially. All you can do is recognize the no, let's say the fear and the tension, recognize you don't even want to be there with it, and say, okay, that's all going on. I'm just going to pause for a moment. That's the beginning of yes. And then, if you hang in there, the recognizing gets deeper, because this is the capacity of mindfulness to start really noticing all the different layers. Oh, not only is there fear, there's a belief that I'm never enough, and that others are going to reject me. And then deep down underneath that, I'm going to be all alone. Oh, that's that ache of loneliness. So you keep going, you recognize, and the yes keeps going deeper. It goes from just allowing, like, okay, I get this is here, I'm not going to do anything, to a profound tenderness. So this is the process I'm describing right now, is the two wings of awareness and how they start deepening and deepening. They're not linear. In other words, you don't always say, okay, I'm going to recognize what's going on, And then I'm going to bring the yes. Sometimes something goes on and you immediately find a way to connect to yes, to bring some kindness in. And that actually helps you to be there and then recognize more deeply. Are you following me on this, these two wings? It can go either way. You can recognize and then bring kindness, or you can bring kindness which then lets you recognize. Example. There's been a lot of research where people will be hooked up to MRIs and there'll be some fearful stimulus like some shock or something, mild shock. And there's research showing the power of holding somebody's hand when you're feeling fear. The holding the hand is the yes. It's giving connection. It's in some way activating love. So when you're feeling fear and you do the yes of activating love, what happens? The limbic system quiets down. So the wing of love, of yes, helps to quiet the limbic system. I have a friend, Dan Gottlieb, who for many years had a radio show from Philadelphia. And his story shows the power with these two wings. When it starts with the wing of the yes, of belonging and connection. And the way his story goes is that when he was a young psychotherapist, he got into a horrific car accident and he ended up quadriplegic. When he was in the, he was in the ICU, and he started getting it, what his life was going to be like. He went into a deep, deep despair, and he didn't want to live. And then he describes how for about a week in, when he was just in the grip of that, a nurse that knew he was a psychologist came in and shared some of her troubles with him. And they spoke some, and she talked about a relationship that was going down and so on. And he was able to say, I know how it is. I know how it is to feel like your life is going downhill. And just was with her in a really, really caring way. And when she left, she said, something really terrible feels like it lifted. I'm feeling different. And it was a moment he could never forget, because he said he closed his eyes and he said, if I can help, I can live with this. And that's something I've never forgotten. Because here he was, facing a life that for most people would seem really, really challenging. A lot of loss, huge, huge loss. And that wing of knowing belonging, a larger belonging, if he could be part of something larger, if he could help, he could then be with this, he could live with it. And for many of us, in relating not only to our society but to others around us, there's a kind of cynicism about whether humans are really good or not. There's a kind of a doubt about others and doubt about ourselves. And our job, in a way, and when I say job, I mean as beings that are waking up, to evolve ourselves towards yes, to shine the light on where we get caught in our no. And we can see it, sometimes it's remembering the yes with others, the way for Dan Gottlieb, it just absolutely changed him. And then we become, with yes, less cynical, less defended, less aggressive. I love the way the story about Roberto Di Francesco went. This is an Argentino golfer. And he once won a tournament, and he got a nice check for the tournament, and smiled for the cameras, prepared to leave. And in the parking lot, and he was relatively new to this, a young woman approached her, congratulated him, and then told her that her son was seriously ill, could be dying. She didn't know how she could pay the doctor's bills. So he's known as a gentleman. He was so touched by the story, he took his penny, endorsed the day's winnings to her, and he basically said, make some good days for the baby. A couple of weeks later, he's at another country club, and one of the officials came over and said that some of the boys in the parking lot at the last tournament had told him what happened about that young woman. He said, well, I have news for you. She's a phony. There's no sick baby. She had no children at all. She fleeced you, my friend. You mean there's no baby who's dying, said Roberto. That's right, said the official. Why, that's the best news I've heard all week. When we encounter someone who's cynical, we can feel the armoring. And when we encounter someone who's sincere, we begin to trust life. Sincerity is one of the most beautiful things we can find in ourselves or each other. It's a real expression of our evolving and waking up. That we are sincere because we've tasted and touched the goodness that can come through ourselves and each other. And we're dedicating ourselves to that. And dedicating ourselves to that means not that we let ourselves be taken advantage of. That's not the message. Of course we're intelligent and we take care of ourselves. But it means that we shine a light on where the greed and the hatred's playing itself out. And as we shine that light, we bring as much presence and kindness to it as possible so we can live from a larger space of being.